The night had started like any other. Friday in a small roadside bar, tucked away on the edge of town. Neon lights buzzed against the cracked windows. Laughter spilled into the night air, and the low hum of motorcycles echoed from the lot outside. The place was alive with noise, beer bottles clinking, country music weaving between the voices, and the smell of smoke curling above the tables. But none of that prepared anyone for what was about to unfold, an incident that would cut through the noise, silence the room, and change how everyone inside looked at themselves, at each other, and at the woman who stood at the center of it all. Her name was Maya. She was a black woman in her mid-30s, a teacher by profession, though most people wouldn't have guessed it seeing her walk through those bar doors. She wasn't from around here. Her accent gave away her upbringing in Atlanta, and her posture spoke of quiet confidence that wasn't common in that dusty little town. That evening, she had come to meet an old friend passing through, but her arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. Eyes followed her as she walked to the counter, not just because she carried herself with grace, but because in that particular bar, a black woman entering alone was rare enough to stir whispers. She ordered a ginger ale, no alcohol, just something to keep her company while she waited. The bartender, a middle-aged man with lines of weariness on his face, gave her a polite nod but said nothing. Behind her, a group of bikers had claimed the back corner, their jackets patched with symbols and names of their crew. The loudest of them all, a broad-shouldered man with a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years, leaned back in his chair, watching Maya with the kind of gaze that wasn't curiosity. It was intrusion. His name was Rex, and he had a reputation in that town, one most people were careful not to cross. Rex slammed his beer down, smirked at his friends, and stood. His heavy boots carried him to the counter where Maya sat. He leaned too close, the smell of alcohol rolling off him. His words slurred but sharp. "Well, ain't this something," he said, his voice carrying enough that the tables nearby went quiet. "What's a girl like you doing in a place like this?" Maya kept her composure. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes, her voice steady. "Just waiting for a friend. Nothing more." But Rex wasn't satisfied with that. Men like him never were when they felt challenged by dignity they couldn't break. He chuckled, glanced at his friends who were already snickering, then leaned even closer. "You're a long way from home, sweetheart. Don't you know this ain't really your kind of place?" The words carried weight. The undertone wasn't subtle. It was the kind of coded language Maya had heard before, the kind meant to remind her of boundaries that others had drawn for her. But Maya didn't flinch. She sipped her drink and replied, "I wasn't aware respect had a zip code." That answer drew a few raised eyebrows from nearby tables. Some smirked at the cleverness, others stiffened, sensing tension brewing. Rex's face darkened, his pride pricked by the refusal to bend. And then, without warning, he did something that would shift the room from laughter to shock in an instant. With a rough tug, he reached for her shirt and yanked, ripping fabric down the side seam in a motion. So sudden the glass in Maya's hand nearly shattered against the bar. Gasps echoed as the sound of tearing cloth cut through the music. The entire bar froze. Maya's chair scraped as she stood, the ripped fabric falling from her shoulder. For a heartbeat, all eyes were locked on the moment. The humiliation meant to break her. But instead, what was revealed silenced the room. Stretched across Maya's shoulder blade and down her arm was a tattoo. Bold, intricate, unmistakable. It was not just art, not just ink. It was history. It was pain and resilience etched in lines that told a story no one in that room expected to see. The tattoo was of chains, broken apart, links scattered, but at the center of it was a black woman's face, regal and unyielding. Her crown woven from the very chains meant to bind her. Above it, written in sweeping calligraphy, were the words, "We rise because they tried to break us." The bar went silent. Even Rex, with his bravado and smirk, stumbled backward a step as if the sight of it struck deeper than he'd imagined. The tattoo wasn't just a picture. It was a statement. A declaration. A reminder of every injustice, every attempt to strip dignity, and the unshakable will to resist. In that instant, the room was no longer just a bar. It was a stage where history stood face to face with ignorance. Maya didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply pulled her torn shirt to the side, exposing the tattoo fully to the room, her eyes moving from face to face. And as she spoke, her voice carried with a weight that made even the jukebox hum sound like silence. You wanted to shame me. But look closely, this is what shame tried to bury. This is survival. This is my story. And no one takes that from me. Her words hung heavy. Some in the bar looked away, ashamed. Others shifted uncomfortably, caught between the instinct to side with Rex's aggression and the undeniable truth, etched in ink before them. A woman in the corner, who had been quietly sipping her drink, dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The bartender's hands froze mid-polish on a glass. Even Rex's friends had gone quiet, the jeers caught in their throats. Rex, though, wasn't a man who gave up easily. His pride, his ego, his whole sense of control had been shaken by the silence that fell in her favor. He snarled, trying to regain the room. "It's just a tattoo," he muttered louder than he meant, as if saying it could undo the impact. But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction, because everyone knew it wasn't just a tattoo. It was everything he feared, a symbol he couldn't overpower. Maya held her ground. She stood tall, the ripped shirt no longer a mark of vulnerability, but a frame for the resilience she carried. In that silence, in that stillness, she turned humiliation into defiance and defiance into dignity, and though the night was far from over, and though conflict still brewed beneath the surface, in that moment, just that moment, the bar had stopped cold. The silence after Maya's words was unlike anything that bar had felt before. It wasn't the silence of boredom or awkwardness, it was the silence of reckoning. People stared at her tattoo, the ink glowing almost like fire under the dim yellow lights, and something about the image stirred, memories that most people in that room didn't often confront. Some looked away because it made them uncomfortable. Others couldn't stop staring because it made them think. Rex, though, refused to let silence be the last word. He wasn't a man who knew how to lose, and his pride was bleeding worse than Maya's shirt. He sneered, taking a half step forward, his voice sharp, trying to claw back control. "Don't start thinking you're special. It's just a picture. You walk in here thinking you're better than us? You think that little story on your back scares me?" But his words didn't land the way he expected. The crowd wasn't cheering for him anymore. His friends shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. The laughter that had fueled him before was gone. The air wasn't with him, it was with her. He could feel it, and the realization only made his anger worse. Maya didn't flinch. She turned her body fully so everyone could see the tattoo, the torn fabric hanging loose. She wasn't hiding, and that made her stronger than anything Rex tried to project. She spoke calmly with a clarity that cut through the stale smoke in the room. "You think this is about being special? It's not. It's about remembering. Every link in these chains is a story of someone who refused to stay broken. People like you tried to silence us, but here I am standing. And here you are, afraid of the truth inked on my skin." The bartender set the glass down, his hand trembling just slightly. He cleared his throat, stepping closer as though drawn by the pull of her words. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his southern drawl carrying a note of respect, "you don't owe anybody in here an explanation. But what you just said, it means something." The comment startled a few of the patrons, because the bartender was known for never getting involved in drama. If he was stepping in, the weight of the moment was undeniable. Rex's face twisted, the humiliation now unbearable. "You all gonna sit here and let her preach to us? In our own bar? You think she belongs here?" His voice was desperate now, his anger unraveling. He wanted the room to side with him. But the more he shouted, the more isolated he became. A woman sitting at a nearby table, a blonde in her 40s, who had been staring at her drink the entire evening, finally looked up. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried. "She belongs here as much as anyone, probably more than some." It was the crack that Rex couldn't stop. The crowd began to murmur, not loudly, but enough to signal a shift. For years, people in that town had let Rex control rooms with his bravado, but something about Maya standing tall with her tattoo, blazing against the smoke and neon lights, made them question that power. Maya turned her gaze directly at Rex, her voice unwavering. "You wanted to tear me down in front of everyone. You wanted to turn me into a spectacle, but all you did was show them who you really are. And all I did was show them who I am." The words struck deeper than any insult could. Rex opened his mouth to retort but found nothing to say. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. The weight of a man who had lived his life as the loudest voice in the room and suddenly realized his voice no longer carried. One of Rex's friends, tall, lean, with a nervous twitch in his hands, finally muttered, "Man, maybe just let it go." That was betrayal in Rex's ears. He spun toward his crew, eyes wide with fury. Let it go? You serious? But even his own men weren't meeting his eyes anymore. They looked down at their drinks, their loyalty fractured by the quiet dignity of the woman before them. The bartender, emboldened by the moment, wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from behind the counter. Rex, he said firmly, you've caused enough trouble tonight. Walk away. The room shifted again. No one could remember the last time someone had told Rex to walk away. He had been the storm people avoided, the kind of man no one stood up to because it wasn't worth the fight. But tonight was different. Tonight, a single act of cruelty had backfired, and the dignity of the woman he tried to humiliate had burned brighter than his power. Maya finally reached down, adjusting her torn shirt, not to cover herself but to tie it loosely at her waist, leaving the tattoo visible. She turned slightly so everyone could still see it, and spoke again, not just to Rex but to the entire room. This tattoo isn't just mine. It belongs to every ancestor who was told they weren't enough, to every person who had to fight just to be seen, and it belongs to everyone in this room too, because whether you admit it or not, the chains that held us still hang over this country. We break them link by refusing to bow our heads. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, not from weakness, but from the sheer gravity of speaking truths that weighed generations deep. And in that crack, people heard sincerity. The woman at the table nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. A man near the jukebox shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor as though he was ashamed of his own. Silence in other moments. In other times, when voices like Maya's had gone unheard, Rex stood frozen, fury simmering but with no army left to back him. His hands twitched at his sides, but he knew if he lashed out again he would lose completely. He wasn't used to this kind of defeat, the defeat of irrelevance. Maya didn't press further. She simply sat back down on the stool, her posture strong, her presence undeniable. She sipped the last of her ginger ale, her eyes steady. The night wasn't over, but the battle was. And in that moment, everyone in the bar realized something they hadn't before. Power wasn't about who shouted the loudest, or who threw the hardest punch. Sometimes power was about the courage to stand in silence, to bear the weight of history on your skin, and to refuse to let anyone rip it away. The bar didn't return to normal after that moment. The jukebox still played, the glasses still clinked, but the air carried something heavier, something that lingered in the silence between words. People found themselves glancing back at Maya's tattoo again and again, like they were drawn to it, as if the ink had carved open a door to something they had kept locked away. Maya sat quietly on her stool, shoulders squared, every inch of her posture declaring that she would not be moved by shame. Her friend hadn't yet arrived, and she could have walked out, but leaving then would have meant surrendering the space to Rex's shadow. Instead, she stayed. She wanted them to see her, really see her, and not as the caricature Rex had tried to paint. Across the bar, a younger man, maybe in his 20s, leaned closer to his buddy and whispered, "Man, that tattoo. I've never seen anything like it." His friend just nodded, staring at the floor, as though struggling with something deeper than just admiration. The bartender went back behind the counter, but his eyes never drifted far from Maya. He had served thousands of drinks in that place, watched countless brawls, arguments and broken bottles, but never had he witnessed a silence that could disarm a whole room. He finally spoke again, his voice low but audible. "That tattoo, it means something to you, don't it?" Maya turned to him, her expression softening just slightly. "It means everything. Every time I look at it, I remember where I come from. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a girl. She'd sit on the porch and talk about our ancestors, how they carried chains not just on their bodies but in their hearts. She said our greatest duty was to make sure those chains never bound us again. When she passed, I promised her I'd carry that reminder with me always." She touched the edge of the tattoo gently. "This is for her. This is for them." The bartender nodded slowly, his lips pressing together as if holding back words he didn't usually allow himself to say. His hands busied themselves with bottles, but his mind was far from the task. At a table near the back, an older man cleared his throat. He had been silent the whole time, his weathered face shadowed by the brim of his hat. Now he spoke, surprising even himself. "My daddy used to tell me things I believed for too long. Things about who belonged where and who didn't. But seeing you tonight, I reckon maybe he was wrong." His voice faltered, but the honesty in it struck the room like another blow of truth. Maya turned toward him, her eyes kind though firm. It takes more strength to admit that than to keep repeating the same lies. We've all inherited chains. Some of us wear them, some of us put them on others. But none of us are free until they're broken. The words stirred something even deeper. People weren't used to hearing raw honesty in that place. It was easier to drink, laugh, and fight than to face the weight of truth. Yet here she was, forcing them to look inward, not with anger but with conviction. Meanwhile, Rex sat back in his chair, seething. His beer sat untouched, foam dying at the rim. He wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. But the more Maya spoke, the more he realized he couldn't stop her without revealing just how powerless he had become. His friends avoided his gaze, their silence louder than anything else. He could feel the shift. The room that once belonged to him now listened to her. Maya, sensing the attention, continued, not to preach but to share. Her voice softened as she recalled a memory. When I was 16, I was walking home from school, wearing a shirt with the words "We shall overcome" printed across the front. A man driving by stopped his truck and spat at my feet. He told me I'd never overcome anything, that I'd always be beneath people like him. I didn't say a word back then. I just kept walking, but those words burned. For years they burned. This tattoo. This is the answer I never gave him. Every time someone tells me I don't belong, I remember this, and I stand taller. Her voice cracked slightly again, but no one mistook it for weakness. In fact, that slight break made her words even stronger. People in the bar found themselves holding their breaths, listening to her like children to a story their elders had kept hidden. A woman who had been silent until now, her hands folded tightly on the table, finally spoke. "I've got a daughter," she said softly. "She's mixed. I worry about what she'll face growing up. I don't want her to carry shame." Her voice shook as she admitted it. "But hearing you tonight, maybe I can raise her to carry strength instead." Maya turned her full gaze on the woman and gave a small encouraging nod. "She doesn't need to carry shame. Teach her where she comes from. Teach her she's the result of survival, of resistance, of love stronger than hate. That's what I was taught. And that's what I'll teach every child I ever meet." The bar seemed smaller now, more intimate, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Conversations like this didn't happen here. But Maya had cracked something open, and now truths were spilling into the room. Even those who didn't speak were changed. The young man at the jukebox shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, his fists clenching at his knees. He had grown up hearing words like Rexes thrown around casually at family dinners, in locker rooms, in parking lots. But hearing Maya now, he realized for the first time how heavy those words must have been on the shoulders of people who carried them. And he wondered, maybe for the first time, what role he would play in breaking those chains. Maya's friend finally walked in then, a tall black man in a worn leather jacket, scanning the room with a puzzled expression as he took in the tension that still clung to the air. He walked straight to Maya, his hand brushing her shoulder protectively. "What happened?" Maya gave him a small smile, her voice steady. "Nothing I couldn't handle." She turned back toward the room, her tattoo still visible, her eyes unyielding. "Just told a story that needed to be heard?" Her friend nodded, his eyes narrowing at Rex, but he didn't press further. He sat beside her, his presence adding another layer of quiet strength. Together they looked like pillars, two people unafraid of taking up space in a place that had tried to deny it. The night was shifting. The bar that had once been ruled by loud voices and intimidation now belonged, for a moment, to dignity, to history, to truth. And though Maya hadn't planned it, though she had only come to meet a friend, her presence had forced everyone there to confront themselves. Some would leave unchanged, clinging to their silence and prejudice, but others, quietly, inwardly, were already beginning to see differently. And Rex? He sat there, his pride bleeding out in silence, realizing that for the first time in his life, his voice had been drowned out not by volume but by truth. The night stretched on, but the bar had not returned to its usual rhythm. The pool table sat abandoned. Darts hung untouched on the wall, and even the jukebox felt out of place, its cheerful tune clashing with the gravity of what had just unfolded. Everyone's eyes flicked between Rex, who sat simmering in his corner, and Maya, who remained upright at the bar, her tattoo a quiet flame burning against the dim light. For Rex, humiliation had always been the worst kind of defeat. He was a man built on reputation, the kind of person who lived off the fear and laughter of others. Tonight, both had been stripped away. He clenched his fists under the table, his mind spinning with what to do next. One part of him wanted to rise, to reclaim the room by force. But another part, an unfamiliar, gnawing part, told him he had already lost. His friends avoided his gaze, their loyalty crumbling with each passing minute of silence. One of them, a wiry man named Dale, finally muttered, "Maybe just let it go. Rex, not worth it." The words, though soft, cut him like a blade. He had always been the leader, the one no one dared challenge. Now his own crew was questioning him. Across the bar, Maya felt the tension thickening again. She could see it in the set of Rex's jaw, the twitch in his hand as it hovered near his bottle, but she refused to cower. She had grown up watching her mother stand tall in worse places than this. She had learned early that silence could be both weapon and shield. Tonight her silence had been louder than Rex's rage, and she wasn't about to surrender that victory. Her friend, Jamal, leaned in slightly, his voice low. "You want me to get you out of here?" His protective instinct was clear, but Maya shook her head. "No," she whispered firmly. "Leaving now would mean he wins." And he hasn't. Rex slammed his fist on the table suddenly, the sound reverberating through the wooden floorboards. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and all eyes snapped toward him. He rose to his feet, towering, his shadow stretching long across the bar. His voice, gravelly and booming, tried to summon the fear that once came so easily. "You think you can walk in here and make me look like a fool?" He barked, his fingers stabbing the air in Maya's direction. "You think a damn tattoo makes you stronger than me?" The room braced for violence. A few people instinctively stepped back, chairs scraping across the floor. But before anyone could move, Maya rose slowly from her stool. She didn't rush, didn't flinch. She stood tall, meeting Rex's rage with a calm that unsettled him more than any threat could have. Her voice carried, steady and sharp. "I don't need a tattoo to be stronger than you, Rex. I already am. Because strength isn't about how loud you shout, or how many people you scare into silence. Strength is standing in your truth even when the world tries to strip it away. That's something you'll never understand." Her words rippled through the bar, each one like a stone dropped into still water. Rex froze, his breath ragged, his chest heaving. The truth of her statement pressed on him, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years, small. The bartender stepped forward again, his voice firmer now, emboldened by Maya's courage. "Enough, Rex, you've had your say. Now leave her be before you dig yourself deeper than you already have." For a moment, Rex looked around, expecting the room to rally behind him. But instead, he saw folded arms, narrowed eyes, and silence that was no longer fear but resistance. Even the men he called his brothers stared into their drinks, unwilling to back his rage. The realization struck him like a blow. He was alone. Maya, seeing the shift, didn't gloat. She simply turned slightly so the tattoo caught the light again, a living reminder of everything he tried to erase. "You tried to tear me down," she said quietly, though everyone could hear. "Instead, you lifted me higher, and you showed this room exactly who you are." The weight of her words settled over him, and for once in his life, Rex had no comeback. His mouth opened, then shut again. The power that had always been his weapon was gone, stripped by truth. He cursed under his breath and shoved past his own crew, storming toward the door. His boots pounded against the wood, his anger trailing like smoke. When the door slammed shut behind him, the bar exhaled as one. For the first time all night, the tension broke. A few people clapped softly, not the applause of a show, but the acknowledgement of something deeply real. Others simply nodded toward Maya, their eyes filled with a respect they hadn't given her when she first walked in. Maya sat back down, her chest rising and falling as the adrenaline drained from her body. Jamal put a steady hand on her back. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. She managed a small smile. "I didn't do it for me," she replied. "I did it for every time someone thinks they can take something from us and get away with it." The bartender, who had watched the entire confrontation unfold, finally spoke up again. "You know, folks round here, we don't get many chances to face ourselves. We just go along, pretend not to see. But what you did tonight, you made us see, and I reckon some of us won't ever forget it." Maya looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the people who had been silent witnesses. "Then let this be the night things start to change. Not just for me, for all of us." The older man in the hat, who had earlier admitted his father's teachings, raised his glass. "To break in chains," he said quietly. Slowly others raised their glasses too, the toast rippling across the room. Maya lifted her glass of ginger ale, her hand steady. "To breaking chains," she echoed. The clink of glasses carried a sound unlike any before in that bar. It wasn't the usual drunken cheer, it was solemn, united and heavy with meaning. Outside, the night air was still. The motorcycles lined up in silence. Rex's engine roared to life in the distance, then faded into nothingness. Inside, the bar felt transformed. It wasn't that prejudice had vanished, or that every heart had changed overnight. But something had shifted. Something undeniable. Maya sat back, her tattoo still visible, her presence unshaken. She had walked in as a stranger, but she would leave as something more, a mirror that had forced them all to confront what they saw. And though the night was nearly over, the story of what had happened in that small roadside bar was only just beginning to spread. The morning after, the town looked the same, quiet streets, faded shop fronts, the hum of early trucks on their way to work. But for the people who had been inside that bar the night before, something felt different. They carried it in their silence, in the way they thought about what they had seen. The moment one woman's dignity had shifted, the weight of an entire room. Word spread quickly. In places like this, stories moved faster than truth. But this one carried a pulse of its own. The night Rex got shut down. That's how it began. At gas stations, on porches, whispered over cups of coffee. People repeated what they'd seen, each version tinged with awe. Some called it a humiliation, others called it a reckoning, but everyone knew something had happened that couldn't be ignored. Maya herself rose with the dawn, weary but unshaken. She and Jamal had driven back to the small motel on the edge of town, where she sat now with a notebook in her lap, staring at the pages. She often wrote after moments of confrontation, not just for herself, but for those who would never get the chance to speak. Her pen moved slowly, the ink capturing fragments of thought. He tried to strip me of dignity. Instead, he stripped himself of power. The chain isn't just iron, it's silence. Last night, silence broke. Grandma, I hope I carried your stories well. Jamal knocked softly on the doorframe before stepping in, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. He handed one to her and sat opposite, watching her with quiet admiration. You know, he said, most people would have left that bar when it turned ugly, but you didn't. Maya gave a small shrug. If I'd left, he'd have won twice. Once when he ripped my shirt, and again when I walked out. She sipped the coffee, her gaze far away. But staying, that was for more than me. It was for every girl who's been told to shrink, for every boy who's been told to be silent. Last night wasn't about me alone. It was about us. Jamal nodded slowly, and they saw it. Whether they admit it or not, they saw it. Meanwhile, back in town, Rex sat alone in his garage, surrounded by the trophies of a life built on intimidation, rusted bike parts, beer cans, the smell of oil heavy in the air. He replayed the night in his mind, each word Maya had spoken echoing louder than the music ever had. He wanted to shake it off, to bury it under anger, but the truth gnawed at him. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the room had turned against him, or if it had finally seen him for what he truly was. By midday, Maya decided to walk through town before leaving. Some people avoided her eyes, uncomfortable with what her presence stirred. Others nodded respectfully, offering small gestures of acknowledgement. And though no one spoke directly of the tattoo, she could feel the weight of their thoughts pressing toward it. At a small grocery store, the woman who had spoken about her mixed-race daughter approached her timidly. She held the hand of a little girl, no older than 7, with curly hair and wide, curious eyes. "This is her," the woman said softly. "This is my Sarah." Maya knelt down so she was eye level with the child. "Hi, Sarah," she said warmly. "You know, you're very special. And no matter what anyone ever tells you, you have every right to stand tall in this world." The little girl smiled shyly, clinging to her mother's hand. Her mother's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for what you said last night, for what you did. I don't think you'll ever know how much it means." Maya touched her tattoo gently, then looked back at the woman. "I know exactly how much it means, because once someone said the same to me, and it saved me." They parted with a quiet exchange, but that small moment became another ripple in the story spreading through the town. It was no longer just about Rex's humiliation. It was about the hope that something better could take root. By evening, Maya and Jamal prepared to leave. As they loaded their bags into the car, the bartender from the previous night walked across the gravel lot. His rough hands fidgeted as he approached. I wanted to say, he began awkwardly. I've worked that bar for 20 years. I've seen fights that ended in blood, seen people broken down for less than what you stood up to, but I've never seen a room stop like that. You gave us something to think about. Me especially. He paused, looking down at his boots. I can't undo the things I've ignored, but I can promise not to stay silent anymore. Maya smiled softly. That's all anyone can do. Choose differently today than they did yesterday. The bartender nodded, then walked back toward town, his shoulders straighter than before. As they drove away, the road stretched long before them, golden in the fading light. Jamal glanced at Maya, who sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. You know, he said last night, that wasn't just a moment. That was history in its own small way. Maya tilted her head, considering his words. History doesn't always happen in big marches or speeches. Sometimes it happens in small bars, on quiet nights when someone decides not to bow. Her hand brushed her tattoo again, the ink warm against her skin. And when it does, we carry it forward. The car hummed steadily down the road, but Maya's thoughts stretched far beyond the town they were leaving. She imagined the little girl, Sarah, growing up with stories of that night. She imagined the older man in the hat reflecting on his father's teachings, maybe teaching something different to his own grandchildren. She imagined Rex forced to reckon with the hollow echo of power lost. She thought of her grandmother, whose voice still lived inside her. We break chains not just for ourselves, but for those who come after. And with that thought, Maya smiled. Not because the fight was over, it never truly was, but because she knew the fight had meaning. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet, Maya whispered to herself, barely audible over the engine, dignity can't be stolen. It can only be surrendered, and I will never surrender mine. The road carried her forward, but behind her, in a small bar in a small town, a story was taking root. A story of a black woman whose shirt was ripped, whose truth was revealed, and whose courage stopped a bar cold. And that story, once told, could never be silenced again.